In the third and final section of Congregation in a Secular Age, Andy begins to unwind, or in some ways to propose a solution to the problem, but not before he really digs one final time into the difficulty that acceleration has. He introduces this idea of dynamic equilibrium. It's dynamic because it always needs to continue to be moving forward, even if that forward motion is incremental. And it's an equilibrium because it allows us to have some stability. But it's a little bit like walking. To walk, we need to be able to be unbalanced for a moment. We need to be dynamically able to fall forward and to catch ourselves and then to move. If we stop moving, the alternative in modernity or in the secular age isn't just to stand still, it's actually to fall. The image of a top, or maybe a figure skater, or something that is moving at great speed. It can only stay up as long as it is moving at a certain rate. And when it slows down, eventually it will just fall over. And that's the fear. And so we are looking for continual, even if it is just small, growth. Throughout the book, there has been, in some ways, an explicit, but often very implicit, not in your face, criticism of Silicon Valley, or of those who think that the solution is always to speed up. Because that does seem to be their alternatives. The alternative is we can keep up, we can keep accelerating, or we can stop and we can die. We close churches, or we keep them going with more and more resources. Those seem to be our two options. And those who are not in danger of closing because they have accumulated enough resources fall into the trap of fatigue or depression that Andy's describing. And there's a whole host of folks out there who would diagnose our problem as if we're just not going fast enough. And on page 178, Andy gives you a classic example. Now, am I, or even Andy, to criticize Tom Bandy, a well-known church consultant? But his advice to churches does sound a lot like acceleration as described by Andy. Listen to this. The principle of acceleration, that's Bandy's words, the principle of acceleration is the first key criterion for assessment. I sometimes call it the principle of Zoom. As a side note, written well before COVID. Every program and leader of the church should effectively grow the church. This may mean numerical or financial growth, or relational and spiritual growth. It may mean more worshipers, the multiplication of small groups, or the swell of new volunteers. Acceleration happens when churches exert themselves to learn more, try different things, welcome new people, raise the bar of accountability, increase resources, and generally get bigger and bolder. That's dynamic stabilization, bigger and bolder, even if it's just a little bit. Notice that all aspects of the church are supposed to be contributing to this acceleration, the principle of acceleration, so that the church can go and go and go and go. But what if our churches are tired of that? Well, some will close. Some will have people fading away. We'll have pastors fading away. We'll have a sort of depressed state in which we'll frantically try to find the next thing. In acceleration, in our imaginations, the only two options are to go fast or to die. In this third section of the book, Andy's going to propose that there is a third alternative, one called resonance. The antidote to alienation isn't slowing down. That will just put us into chaos and ultimately we'll be out of sync with what is going on in the world around us. And it's not that we want to be in sync, but we are in sync with it. The timekeeper of Silicon Valley has made us accelerate, and there's very little that we can do about that as a congregation. That's the world that we live in. But that doesn't mean that it's ultimately hopeless, according to Andy. What can help us is the event of resonance. And the next video that we'll move into, the final video, we'll talk about some of the theology behind that. We'll find that in Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We'll find that in the way that Jesus interacts with children. But for now, what I think is important for us to get our heads around is that in alienation, we are in the world and we're interacting with the world, and so in that we're relating to the world. It's not possible to exist without relating to things. But we're not really engaged in the world. We're not really connected to the world. We're not really resonating, where two frequencies are aligned so that they are in pitch with each other and that they then form a kind of new sound, a new way of being. Resonance happens in an event or in an encounter. An event is where something actually happens, where we encounter another person, or in some times we might encounter the world that we live in ways that are deep and in our ways that are real, and ultimately are going to be ways in which God can be present in. Alienation makes us go through life without encountering others, but resonance allows us to go through life and encounter others. We are able to see them, we're able to hear them, and we can then delight and love in them. Andy will come back to the story of the little girl in the gym and saying, "This is so great," and what that does to him. At times it might seem like it's mystical, and I suppose it could be. There may be moments in your life in which there are these moments of clarity perhaps, and nothing extraordinary has happened, but you have this sense in which there is something greater than you and something greater that is connecting with you, that is personal to you and is present for you in a way that you couldn't imagine. I once tried to get across this idea in a sermon, and it's kind of hard, I think, at least. Maybe I'm just not a very good preacher. But it was the time of Advent, and it was a time of preparation, and Advent is the darkest time of the year, at least in North America, and it's also a difficult time. And Advent is also supposed to be, at the start, this sort of apocalyptic time where God is entering into the world with John the Baptist and all kinds of crazy prophetic things going on. And we make Christmas into this sort of saccharine thing, but it's like Advent can be hardcore. And I happened to be watching The Walking Dead while I was preparing for Advent. And there was this scene, it was very early in the series, and there was this scene in which Carl, the boy, is in a forest, and all around there are are zombies, and which are people who are alienated from their experience. They're alienated by life. They're looking for life. They're looking for a spark to move them out of whatever it was. They are people who are living in the secular age. And here's Carl, a living, breathing boy, and he's in the forest and he's walking along, and there's a deer that's in the clearing ahead, and the light is coming down, and Carl is able to move closer and closer, and the deer is the antithesis to the zombies that are going on around him, because the deer is alive and is delicate and is beautiful. And just as Carl is getting close and he's about to touch it, there's a gunshot, and of course the deer is dead, spoiler alert. And it's this moment of almost being there at transcendence, almost touching the beauty of life, surrounded by the alienation of the zombies, that struck me as important, and struck me as that this was a moment in time when Carl and the viewer were able almost to touch the transcendent. You may have experiences like that in your life, and you might not be able to articulate them in ways that make sense to you or to others. But research shows, and I'm willing to have a hunch, that many of us have these moments, and it's the ability to be able to talk about those moments and to be able to see them for what they are that is getting us towards understanding and seeing what resonance can be. This idea of resonance can be a little bit abstract and encounter even my example earlier of a show, a TV show, The Walking Dead, and that can not necessarily be real for people. But I think that at some level we intuitively know that the secular age is shaping us and changing us in ways which are not good for us. There's a project in the United Kingdom called the Peel Project. You can go online and you can see some of their work. And they realized this in relationship to young people's mental health. One of their brochures has this, that they are to uncover, discover, and reveal. It's a program with measurable mental health benefits to help us navigate a noisy, chaotic, and anxious world. Noisy, chaotic, and anxious. Doesn't that sound like acceleration and something that we encounter? Their strategy is relatively simple. They know that young people don't go out and mingle with their friends in the same way that they would have in the past. They also don't go out and encounter the world. The number of injuries from falling out of a tree has dropped off precipitously, and you would think that that's a good thing. But in fact, what it means is that over half of UK children have never climbed a tree. When you never encounter the world, it's hard to then have an encounter that means something. And people spend more and more time on screens. And so their encounter with each other is always mediated by this image that they want to project. The selfie. Young people, millennials, apparently will take thousands and thousands of selfies in their lives. I'm horrible at it. I have no idea how to do it. But I see that it's ubiquitous, and my kids do it all the time. So Peel, what they've done is instead of fighting against these trends, which would be slowing down the acceleration, they ask the question, how can we create some kind of event or encounter using some of the technology in ways which are unexpected, or in ways which allow us, in their words, to uncover, discover, and reveal. So instead of selfies, what they do is they get together groups of people, young people, and they give them cameras and they train them on how to take portraits. And then they set them loose with a partner to go and to take an artistic portrait, not a selfie, but somebody else looking at you and to shape you and to frame you and to present you to the world in a way which in some ways is true about who you are. They go one step further because the encounter on the surface can be quite surface, right? The picture, you can't get behind it. It's there. But in order to get behind into the person that they're taking the portrait of, they interview them, they talk to them, and then they write a poem about them, which can sound terrifying, but the way that the Project Peel people do it, it seems natural. What they're doing is they're giving young people the skills to be able to encounter each other, to see each other, and to hear each other. Not only that, but to be able to say something of significance and to present something to the world about who they are. And they find that in that encounter, the young people come alive. They have an experience of resonance in doing that. Now, your congregation might not want to buy cameras and start running a permanent Project Peel. That's fine. But there's something, and Andy will get to this in these final chapters, about the resonance that comes with childhood that we need to somehow recover in our congregations. The story that he uses throughout is the story of the little girl, and it's so great. The window behind me that is blurry, but you can see a picture of it in a moment, is a picture of Jesus and the little children. And you might not even actually need to see it because most churches have that. What if we look at little children not as a resource, not as something to accumulate, not like vampires with fresh blood needing that to sustain the acceleration to grow as we go? What if we see them as people who bring resonance, people who bring encounter and event? That's where Andy's going to go. How do we move the child, and how do we move resonance into the life of the congregation in a secular age?